Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Trial Site News interview. I'm Brandon, your host. Today, we'll be talking to Deb Conrad along with her attorney, Warner Mendenhall. Deb was fired for her position as a hospitalist and physician assistant at Rochester Regional Health System, apparently for just following the law and reporting all reported vaccine injuries by her patients to VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. VAERS was established in 1990 and is managed jointly by the FDA and CDC. Is meant to act as an early warning system to identify adverse reactions or side effects of vaccines. In response, Ms. Conrad and Mr. Mendenhall have filed a lawsuit against the hospital system that terminated her after 15 years. We'll be discussing the details of her reporting to VAERS, the actions of the Rochester Health Regional System, and the whistleblower lawsuits. Deb and Conrad, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Deb, let's start with how we got here. Can you take our audience back to 2021 when the vaccines were being rolled out, when you started hearing from your patients about possible adverse events?
Sure. So prior to that, I had been a hospitalist PA, like you had mentioned, for 15 years. I worked primarily inpatient and ICU care. I worked the entire 2020 pandemic when COVID first came out. And the vaccines came out in December 2020. And they first were released to the local patients in our nursing homes. So that was kind of the first group of people that I started seeing with problems, and my colleagues were seeing with problems. And shortly thereafter, it was the healthcare workers that then started receiving vaccination, and then the general community. So right around in January, and I distinctly remember a colleague of mine in the hospital that came to me and mentioned that she tracked the acute heart attacks that would come into our emergency room. And these aren't like your small ones. These are the big ones that get shipped out. And normally she would see, maybe one a month, and she had already seen 4 and had said, there's something not right. It seemed, what happened, kind of thing. And this was already in January. And so, right away after the vaccines were started to be rolled out to, again, the nursing homes in particular, and then the healthcare workers, people were just in general talking about some odd side effects that they were seeing. I didn't initially get vaccinated at all, but I mean, in that first wave, because the vaccine that was being offered, we had to drive quite a distance to be able to get, because it had needed these freezer requirements. And I said, I'm not going to, drive out there. But initially, when this all started, I hadn't been at that point that I was questioning the vaccines that were coming. So, my colleagues started experiencing a lot of different side effects: vertigo, especially ringing in the ear, dizziness. Some people just felt flu-like. Some people were getting COVID. And then we had our nursing home patients coming in, getting sick with COVID, and then which required admission. And I said, well, geez, this is not what they're telling us. They're telling us that the COVID stops with these vaccines. If you get them, you're not going to get COVID. And I said, what I'm seeing is completely opposite. That seems awfully odd. And then again, just weird conditions, young people coming in with blood clots and heart attacks that didn't have risk factors, people who were already on full blood thinners coming in with blood clots on top of that. Just, again, weird stuff. And, we all started talking about it in the hospital, at least the ones that were aware of this or awake to this. And I kind of went on the side and started doing my own research and trying to see what was going on. Were other, healthcare workers seeing this? And I came upon the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. Prior to that, I had not heard of that system, nor have I ever been educated that I remember on that system. And quickly began to realize that there was we were supposed to be reporting these side effects that were happening, that we were seeing, and no one was doing it. So I took it upon myself to start kind of educating myself on how to do this. Mm-hmm. And I notified my leadership that this was something I was going to take on, because I was part of leadership as well. I worked in clinical direct patient care medicine, but then I also worked as the advanced practice provider director for our health system. So I let my colleagues know, hey, this is what I'm going to do. Let my supervisor know. And at first, no one really had an issue with it. So I put envelopes in the emergency room and our urgent care, and then let a lot of my colleagues and the nurses know, hey, I'm going to be doing this. If you see anything weird, just leave a demographic sheet and I'll contact the family or the patient and let them know. And so that's what I did for about a month. And in the meantime, I again kept emailing my direct leadership and the leadership of the health system, our infection control nurse, and said, hey, we really need to have a system in place so we can get these potential adverse side effects reported in a timely manner and get things documented in the chart. You know, this is our duty. And right away, everyone was kind of blowing me off and kind of acting like I was making a whole lot out of nothing. And again, it became a full-time job, what I was doing. And it was nothing you could do during your work day. I would grab the demographic sheets and then go home for the evening after sometimes a 13-hour shift. And I'd sit at night and file these reports. And each one takes anywhere from, 20 minutes, sometimes longer, depending on how severe the patient's side affected hospitalization were. And I just said, I can't do this. Like, this is taking up my entire life. So again, I kept going back to leadership and telling them, we need to come up with a system. Can we work together? And I think they finally got upset with me to the point that they said, you know what, we're going to audit your charts, because no one in leadership in the system anywhere is reporting what you're reporting. So basically they're saying, the gaslighting, the whole thing begins. And I said, fine, I have no problem with you auditing my reports, because I was following exactly what was on the website for VAERS of what you were supposed to report to a T. So I picked like the best patients, the best scenarios, and I said, here, take a look at it. Now, I wasn't included in that audit. I was not allowed to be part of that review. But the conclusion when they came back was that basically they're saying that I was over-reporting, and that as a result of that, my punishment was that I could no longer report on any other patients other than the ones I was directly taking care of. So if a colleague of mine, the ER, whatever, said, Deb, can you take care of this? I was to tell them, nope, I can no longer do that. So I asked them, well, what is the plan then to get these patients reported? What are you going to do? And they said, well, we'll have the, we want, if someone's not reporting, put it in Safe Connect, which is an internal system, and then we'll take care of it. And I said, okay, but how do I know you've taken care of it? And basically that's not your business, and you have no right to know that kind of thing. I just wasn't comfortable with that. So I just kept pushing. And I quickly realized that I wasn't going to get anywhere with this, that there was, for whatever reason, they were not willing to work with me on this issue. And, I guess I kind of started to realize that, maybe my job was going to be in trouble if I kept pushing this issue. So again, I started reaching out to other people. I called the New York State Department of Health. I personally wrote to Dr. Tom, I think it's Shimabukuro from the CDC. I think that's how you said his name. I wrote to the FDA themselves. I actually spoke with a gentleman there. I wrote to our DNV, which are our hospital accrediting body, and I let them know, hey, this is going on. These patients are coming in. They're the ones often who are telling us I'm having a problem here, and they're not getting their voices heard. They're not getting these VAERS reports done. This is something that's required by law. We're mandated as healthcare workers to do this, and I'm being shut down. Of course, I got no feedback from any of those individuals. I either just no response. So then I did find an attorney that was willing to write some legal letters on my behalf to the CDC, the FDA, and to my health system, basically telling them, look, you're breaking the law. This is not good. And again, I didn't hear anything back again. So I just kept pushing, and eventually I went public. And I went public at the end of September, and I was terminated abruptly on October 6th, 2021. I had come in that Monday of the work week, worked a full shift, no issues. And then on Tuesday around 1 p.m., right after lunch, I was surrounded by the human resources department, and then I was interrogated in a room, and then walked back to my workstation and publicly walked out like a criminal. It was pretty dramatic. There was no going to get my things, cleaning out my locker. That wasn't allowed. I was to leave the hospital immediately. All of the patients that I had that day, I saw them in the morning and I wasn't able to come back in the afternoon to discharge them. They don't know what happened to me and just was basically thrown out. And that's kind of the story. In the meantime, through this whole process, fortunately, I was saving emails and I was recording conversations. And I was also threatened to be reported to the New York State, my New York State PA Society for spreading misinformation, because reporting to VAERS and talking to patients about their vaccine injury is apparently misinformation. And it is punishable by having your license removed. So they did threaten me with that as well. And mind you, this is a health system that before this all happened in 2020 and for many years before, that elevated me to a very high level. I'm the first, non-physician who sat on the medical executive board of our hospital. I was the first non-physician to help secure voting rights for and have us be members of the medical staff. The hospital had me speak on an NPR radio station during COVID for the COVID response. I was picked to go to Rochester General to train for COVID. I was nominated for Physician Excellence of the Year award just 6 months prior to being fired. I'm the first non-physician to receive that nomination, and this is from my colleagues. So I'm not just I don't know.
You've been there 15 years.
Yes,
and you get awards, and then all of a sudden this happens as soon as you start, doing what you're supposed to do. Were you given an official reason by HR on why you were terminated?
No, I can tell you that is the one conversation that I was not able to record, because I believe at that point they knew I was recording, I was recording them. So they surrounded me with, before I was able to kind of get my recorder in place. But what they told me during that interrogation meeting was they asked me why I went public. Why did I go on the high wire? Why did I go to the New York Times? Why was I speaking out? They also questioned me about what's called test to stay. Again, I think they were looking for a reason to fire me, and they said that I wouldn't test to stay, meaning that I wouldn't agree to allow myself to be tested for COVID in order to keep my job. So at that point, the mandates were coming down, and we briefly had the option to allow, to get a COVID test every day, and then we could keep our jobs. Yeah. I did sign up for that. I actually have proof of that. So I don't know where they were going with that, because we were ultimately never allowed a test to stay option. They dropped that program anyway. So those are basically the questions. They also brought up why I had a GoFundMe account. Now, obviously, I'm a pretty smart person, and I realized the day, when they fire me, they're going to take it all, right? They're just going to cancel me that day. And I was the income, I hold the income for my family. At the time, my husband was a stay-at-home dad. So what am I going to do? So I started a GoFundMe account a couple weeks prior to that to raise funds to keep me going after I got fired. And they were very upset with that. Right. So those were the three things that were brought up in that meeting. They did not give me a reason that I was fired. And in fact, on my termination letter, there is no reason. It just says, as of this day, you no longer work for us. You're no longer part of us. And again, this was a month before the mandates were finalized. So I did not get vaccinated, but my direct colleague who shared my alternate week, who we've been direct colleagues for 15 years, she was let go a month after, because that's when the mandate was finalized. So I was the only one fired that day. Mm-hmm. So they can't use the vaccine as the reason I got fired, because I still had a month left, Okay.
So let's talk about this lawsuit now. Warner, I want to talk to you about how your law firm got involved, and when you determined there was sufficient evidence to bring this to a lawsuit.
Well, I had been very public, and of course had been working with Brooke Jackson on her lawsuit against Pfizer for clinical trial fraud. So I had given some interviews publicly, and I think that's how Deb found me, is due to some of those interviews. And that lawsuit is specifically under the Federal False Claims Act. I've been litigating under the Federal False Claims Act for almost 26 years now, since the 1990s. And it's the most wonderful law, I think, in our toolbox that we can use to get after problems in these federal programs. And it was originally written by Lincoln in 1863, when the Union Army was being provided substandard equipment. And it essentially, it deputizes citizens like Deb Conrad, like Brooke Jackson, like any of you out there who knows about a fraud on the taxpayer. And, you know, there has to be some interpretation of that, and there has to be some linkage of it. And when Deb called me, I didn't know offhand what the linkage would be, but I knew that this rollout, that the hospital is making money on the rollout. And when you're making money from the federal government, you make certain certifications. And I kept asking her, you know, what did they sign? What did they agree to? What did they certify that they were going to do or not do in order to receive this federal money? And she found the document. It's called the COVID-19 Vaccination Program Provider Agreement. And that document right in there, it absolutely floored me, because you almost never see this. But right in the document itself, it said they were liable under the False Claims Act. So I thought, oh my goodness, here we go. I'm ready to roll. And she had done such a marvelous job, and everybody should listen to this as a case study. You know, get the recordings, get the documents. It's not a HIPAA violation to bring patient documents to an attorney when there's a Federal False Claims Act violation. You don't want to take patient documents and put them out publicly, but you can bring them to an attorney, and we know how to handle those and get those reported basically to the federal government. And we do have a process there as well that we have to go through. Because under the False Claims Act, we actually have to give our government a chance to do the right thing. So the first thing that we do is develop the lawsuit, and then we file it under seal, and we notify the federal government that it's filed, and we go and meet with them and show them what we have found. And then for a period of time, they analyze it and determine whether they want to either intervene or allow the individual, like Deborah has decided to do, to go forward on her own. And that's how the act is set up that way, because sometimes the federal government doesn't have the resources, you know, to go after all the fraud. Sometimes the money at issue, they may consider it to be too small to go after, but a citizen is nevertheless empowered with an attorney to go forward on that. And really interestingly, in 1986, there was an amendment to the Federal False Claims Act. And in that amendment, it actually says that citizens will be a check on federal government corruption or politics. So the Senate, when it amended the act, actually viewed the citizens of the United States as patriots who would check corruption in government using the False Claims Act. So it's specifically in the history of this that's the role. And then in Deb's case, we had a very good U.S. attorney in Buffalo, New York, who met with us. They were very welcoming. I think they gave us a serious review of the case, but in the basket of cases that they're handling right now, this did not rise to the level for them to proceed. And they're allowing us now to proceed on our own, and we're happy to do that. I think this is just a wonderful case, and I'm happy to vindicate Deb Conrad and vindicate what she was doing and enforce the law as it was written. So that's what we're doing. I hope that explains it. I do have the program participation agreement, and if you'd like, we can share that and go over that.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, if you I didn't want to jump in there and cut you off, but if you want to share that document, you can go ahead and do that now.
Oh, I would love to do that. I think this is an amazing example. So, and I want to emphasize every provider had to sign this. All the hospitals, all the doctors that were providing shots, all the drugstores, all the local governments that provided shots, county and city governments, and they are potentially liable under this if they fail to report things as simple as, did someone we gave the shot to get COVID and be hospitalized? That would be a moderate reaction that they have to report. And just to simplify this again for your audience, what I say many, many times is that if a child comes in and has been abused, the hospitals are mandatory reporters. The doctors are mandatory reporters. They have to report that abuse. This is the same mandatory report that has to be made. If you came in and essentially were abused by this shot and got sick or had a reaction, then that hospital's a mandatory reporter. That's what they're not doing. They should treat it that seriously. It's very serious. And the reason that VAERS is so important is exactly what you said earlier. This is our early warning system. This is the system that's supposed to show us whether the shots work or not. This is the system that shows us whether the shots are doing damage or not. And they are really deficient in their, in their duties here. So I'm going to scroll down here. This is the provider agreement, and these are all the items that people have to agree to. And then what's important in here for me, and that really caught my attention, is this line, line 10. The organization must report moderate and severe adverse events. It's not may report, they must report. Right. That means all these drugstores that know about an adverse event, all these hospitals, all these doctors must do the report. And you know what we found is almost none of them are doing it. That means they're all liable under the False Claims Act. And then down here, you see, by signing this form, I understand and will comply with the agreement requirements listed above. So they, they will comply. There's no, I might comply, I may comply. Right. And then one of the issues in all of our litigation is right here in the middle of the screen, material conditions of payment. We are always fighting this materiality issue. And in fact, I'm going to again refer to the Brooke Jackson case, because the federal government and Pfizer, they're all saying, well, or I should say particularly Pfizer is saying, well, the government kept paying us even though they knew it wasn't effective, it was unsafe. In fact, it made you likely to get COVID. In fact, more people died in the vaccine arm than in the control arm. And the government knew all this and they kept paying for the shot. So that wasn't material in that case. But what is material is if you fail to report those adverse events. Right. It says it right here, and you agreed that it's material. And in fact, your reimbursement, you see this right here, a reimbursement for administering. Your reimbursement depends on you making these reports. And if you don't make these reports, receiving reimbursement for administering the shots is actually a violation of law. And down here, it says it's a violation of the False Claims Act. I mean, how many times are you reading along and you're thinking, well, I wonder if this fits under the False Claims Act? Well, I don't have to wonder anymore. They're telling us. Yeah. And then it says other federal laws. I can tell you 18 USC, that whole section of the code, those are criminal violations. And this first one here, 1001, is actually for lying to the federal government. And essentially what's happening here is they're lying by not notifying the federal government. So it's a lie by omission. They are telling these people they are criminally liable up to 5 years in federal prison for omitting this information and not reporting this to the federal government. So these are things that, Deb understood there were problems and there were federal laws that needed to be met. And she was essentially doing everything she could for her organization to keep it safe, to keep it from committing crimes. But here they have, they violated the False Claims Act, which is essentially a fraud. And they have presumably violated all these criminal statutes as well. So, this is a way for us as a people, if we want to hold these providers accountable for their wrongdoing, we actually can do it. There's a very clear pathway here. It's outlined here, and they all agreed to it. That's the important thing. So anyway, I saw this and I had my hook. I knew how I could get this thing drafted and filed and could proceed with it. And I actually really look forward to the day that Deb gets to tell her story to a jury. I will say one more thing about it. An important element of the False Claims Act is something called it's called Section 3730H. And that protects the whistleblowers. You have to file your case within 3 years of being fired. But if you do that, it actually requires that if we prove up our case, that Deb be reinstated to her job. So she can go back in as a hero whistleblower and be reinstated to her job if she wants to. And additionally, all that back pay that she's missed out on, all that suffering, they owe her double her pay for any years she's gone unpaid. Additionally, they actually owe her attorney fees on top of that. So a whole series of things can happen to this hospital now.
Right. Okay. And it just made me wonder, given what we've heard on studies in the past about the underreporting to VAERS by a factor of sometimes 10 or even up to a factor of 100, it makes you wonder how many adverse events have not been reported. And Deb, I'll go back to you for a minute. Do you, I think you may have answered this earlier, but had anyone else in the hospital staff initiated reports to VAERS that you were aware of, or were you the only one that was really doing that, on a routine basis?
I was the only one doing it.
Okay.
Yeah, I was. Again, a lot of it has to do with the time element. There's just so much involved in doing a report, and there's no system in place to make this efficient to be able to do it. So, and again, prior to this whole happening, we were not educated. And I actually have the president of our hospital on recording stating that it's not their job to educate us, that it's our job to educate ourselves, which is contrary to the program participation agreement, where they say that they will certify that everyone involved in the organization, the employees and everyone below, will comply with this agreement. Well, how do we comply when we weren't received education that this even exists and this was even a requirement?
Mm-hmm.
I had to go out on my own to learn about this. We received no education. It wasn't until I started speaking out that we started to receive an email. And at the bottom of the email, it said, please report your patients to VAERS. There was no information about what to report. There was no education. Now, I mind you, we were educated every 5 minutes about how great these vaccines were.
Right.
But again, the side effects, no.
Not,
and for my colleagues, I don't believe they had any idea that until I spoke out that this had to be done. And again, because I was being shut down and interrogated and gaslit and everything under this, they were all afraid of losing their job like me. So many of them just,
Did any of the employees, even though they did not want to go public, did they tell you anything privately about adverse events they were seeing too? They just were afraid to report them?
Oh, absolutely. I had many colleagues who would leave, like I said, demographic sheets of patients that they said, there's something wrong. This patient got this vaccine and now they're having this. And they would slide that in my drawer secretly. That's how I got so many of these patients. And I knew so many of them weren't being reported after I was no longer allowed to report, because they kept giving me them and saying, somebody's got to do something. And again, I'm the only one who knew how to do this. They knew it. And so they just kept giving me patients. And I told them I can't report these now, but I saved them.
Sure.
So these are the ones that their respective attending physician or attending nurse or whatever knew this had to be reported, and they didn't do it because they were afraid. I was getting pulled into meetings. It seemed every couple of weeks, I was getting pulled into meetings about this, that, you know, I was creating vaccine hesitancy and people were getting uncomfortable, and I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
So Warner, between the document you shared and this mountain of evidence too that Deb has collected via data and recordings, I'm assuming all are admissible in court. The data that she collected, any documentation and recordings, that are they all permissible in court?
They are, yes. And in really, I want to give you an idea of the scope of the problem. This is one system. In our estimation, 12,000 people came back to the system due to an adverse reaction for the shot. This is just one out of 2,800 systems nationally, right?
Right.
You do the math on that. That is a huge number. And I mean, in kind of in my own internal figuring and off the cuff, math, it looks to me like about 20% of the people who had the shots have had some kind of adverse reaction to them that they've noticed, that they've reported. And really in the long run and in the long term, I think there's going to be far more. People are getting cancers that seem to really behave very differently than the normal cancers. Women, that was one of the first clues that I saw in the spring of 2021. Pregnant women were losing their baby. I had 3 nurses from the OBGYN section of a local hospital come to see me in tears about all the babies they were taking to the morgue. So there's so many things that are happening. And then the ongoing strokes, heart attacks, heart problems, all of that stuff is kind of looming over us, I think, as a nation. So it may be, I think the initial tranche of 20% may grow, and it may be much larger than what we thought. One of the things that, and let me share the screen again one time, if I may, real quick. I want to show this is part of the document, you guys. So maybe you could post this in the show notes or something. But this page tells you who is liable under the False Claims Act for this. You see this. It's a ton of facilities. There's literally a list in the program provider agreement of the facilities that have signed these agreements and that are presumably liable. It's really a long list, and it could include prisons. And think about this: private prisons, childcare, that are all administering the shots. Obviously, nursing homes, hospitals, any kind of health center have all signed off on this and are presumably liable. There are some nuances to it, which we can get into when we look at an individual's case. But if you work at one of these facilities and they haven't done the reporting, and you have evidence of people who've been injured that went unreported, then you may have a case. And the other thing that I think is fascinating about what has happened here, we have the ability now to hold every one of these institutions accountable, because the victims themselves can cause them to be held responsible. And in fact, I don't know if you know this, Brandon, but we've developed a group called Freedom Council. It came out of the initial COVID litigation conferences that initially I started off with Steve Kirsch in Atlanta in last year. But what this can really do is empower the people who've had an adverse event. So if you've been hospitalized, your own and they failed to report it to VAERS, your own record provides the evidence that they committed a civil offense and a crime. Your own personal health record shows that. And I think this is a way for us to get some accountability and to provide something that the victims can do. I mean, they have been horribly gaslit. They are barred from suing under the various laws, the countermeasures laws, all the protections for this, and we all have heard about that. I think those are unconstitutional, by the way. And those are being challenged right now, and I hope we can strip them of their immunity from civil damages. But meanwhile, they are liable right now under this fraud that they've committed by failing to report. And the number is not a big number, but there is a penalty per failure to report of $20,000. So if I went into court against a hospital and had some of the victims, some of the people who've suffered adverse events, they could craft their own lawsuit. They do need a lawyer, and we are trying to work with lawyers throughout the nation. We have 250 lawyers that are participating right now in Freedom Council. We have an event coming up. I guess I'll pitch that event. We're going to be in Denver, June 7th, 8th, and 9th. And that is where to come to see if you want to do something, we got something for you to do. I guarantee it. And it really, people from all walks of life, whatever you are able to do, we've got something for you to do. And we need your help. And in fact, we need to have a conversation about all of the things we can do, because frankly, Deb and I had that conversation. When she called me, I thought, this is horrible, this is bad, but I didn't know what I could do for her yet.
Right.
I just didn't know. But as the conversation develops with an individual like Deb, I start putting it through my little frameworks here, and I start seeing, oh, there's a pathway here. And that's the same thing that needs to happen. That conversation needs to continue to happen in all kinds of different ways around this COVID crisis. And I think we have found some pathways. We're going to find many, many more ways to hold people accountable for what they did. And not just in the VAERS program. I mean, that's what we're talking about today, but in all of the stuff that they did.
So what are the next steps in this case? Do you have a court date yet? Do you have have you heard any response from the defendant?
They have been served, and they asked for some additional time to answer us. I'm going to look up in my email right now and see if I've got a response from them. But it's coming up very shortly. Their answer or any motions they may want to make, such as a motion to dismiss. That they have to decide what they're going to do. And I predict that they will file a motion to dismiss. I also predict we will succeed in defending that motion to dismiss, because Deb did such a good job with the evidence, and her story is very compelling. I think we're going to get past that motion to dismiss. Once we get past that, then we go into discovery, and we get to ask about the interrogation. We get to ask about their internal communications. I'll be very interested in seeing what the president had to say to his underlings about the program participation agreement and their requirements to file these VAERS reports. And I'll be very interested to see if he understands the civil and criminal liability that he may have put the hospital in jeopardy of.
So is there any other, as we wrap up here today, thanks again for joining us. Is there anything else? I know, Warner, you mentioned the conference in Denver. Is there anything else we did not cover that you'd like to touch on, either one of you?
I just want people to get to that conference, please. Come, let's get the victims together. Let's get the lawyers together. We've got wonderful experts coming. Everybody knows Dr. Pierre Corey and Paul Merrick. They're going to be there. Meryl Nass will be there. She's done such a great job on the WHO. So many other people are going to be there. We're talking about broader issues, social issues, such as the general medicalization of childhood. We're going to be talking about how to defend doctors' licenses and PA licenses when they come under attack. We're all the lawyers are engaged in that right now in various ways. So I think it's just a wonderful time to come together. And on the one hand, we've got to grieve for our society and what's happened to our family members and all the people who've been hurt. but we also need to celebrate rebuilding our nation and making it function better. We understand now the severe deterioration and corruption at the FDA and the other agencies, and we got to fix it. We got patriots inside the government and outside the government that are dedicated to this. That's what the conference is about. That's why we called ourselves Freedom Council. You know, freedom is about what this country was founded on, and you know, we need to preserve it.
Deborah, do you have any final words for us?
Well, I just want to again encourage people if they want to follow this lawsuit as we go along. I do have a website up. It's called iam.debconrad.com, and the a link to the complaint, the actual filed complaint, is on that website. There also is a donate button to help us fund this lawsuit. And you know, we'll provide updates on there as we move along if they want to follow where we're at. But thank you again for having us.
No, thank you. We will link, we will put those links at, in the bottom description part of these videos, of this video. So Deb Conrad and attorney Warner Mendenhall, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure.
And for unbiased news and opinion articles and the latest in scientific research, please visit trialsitenews.com and follow us on X, Rumble, and YouTube.